Welcome to the weekly address from the Almighty Sigma of the Republic of Boskasia. I am the Almighty Sigma, Jason Bosky, and this is the news and goings on for the Republic this week. Today is April 10th, 2025. And the story of the week has been the continued turmoil associated with the blanket tariffs that have been put on all imports into the United States from the various nations and governing bodies throughout the world. Luckily, the Republic did manage to avoid the tariffs. Now, on the bright side of things, the only thing that the Republic currently exports is services, and services were exempt from the tariffs that were placed on the world by the United States. Only the goods were tariffed on that. And because the United States has a trade surplus with services. So with a trade surplus, they did not take that into account when determining what the trade deficit was with each country when they decided how much they were going to charge for those tariffs. But the tariffs have caused the global markets to shudder and shimmy and vibrate and gyrate and go all over the place. The market is just hoping that cooler heads will prevail and that these tariffs will be lifted, or at the very least treated in a responsible manner. Because currently the president of the United States is not being reasonable with this. He is being quite petty, to be clear. That is antithetical to the Republic of Boskasia, which believes in magnanimity and being magnanimous. Pettiness and being petty are antithetical to that. Why is that? Because when you're magnanimous and when you have integrity, you treat those around you with respect and without duress, without threat. And the whole point of this, from one perspective, is to beat, for lack of a better term, the rest of the world into compliance, right? They don't want a deal. The United States does not want a deal that is amicable and a win-win for everybody. The United States wants everybody to comply with their demands. This does not affect the Republic, at least not at this time, because the Republic, like I said, has gone under the radar as far as that goes. However, and I believe I mentioned this in the most recent address, the solar panels that will need to be brought in will have to go through the United States in order to reach the Republic of Boskasia. We do not have customs at the Republic just yet. We do not have a port of entry to have those customs. So the solar panels, if they are in fact manufactured in China, will have to come through a port of entry in the United States. That is where I believe it's 125% now, tariffs will be applied to those solar panels, which could potentially reduce the size of the array, possibly up to in half, which would drastically affect the amount of energy which could be exported back to the United States, because the purpose of the solar array was to generate excess energy to sell it back to the United States so that the area in Florida where the enclave is, where the Republic is, would be able to get that energy and use that energy and not have to buy it from afar. And perhaps because there's additional supply, any additional supply has the ability to reduce the overall cost, because you increase the supply, depending on how elastic the demand curve is, that could lead to lower prices. Now, what's 50 kilowatts going to do, which is on a good day, 300 kilowatt hours? Who knows? I'm not necessarily sure that would really move the needle, but it can't hurt is the way I look at it. And it also allows for the Republic to have a cheap, convenient power to for the citizens and the industries within the Republic. So that is the biggest issue that we will have. But also anything that has to be imported into the United States, where we have to get all of our trade from, the Republic definitely has a trade deficit in goods with the United States. We have a trade surplus in services, without a doubt, but we do not. But we have a trade deficit in goods with the United States. So we will have to rethink everything that we are doing in order to build out and industrialize and modernize the Republic, because everything is going to cost more. I mean, even if it's American made, right? If it competes with imports, the reduction in supply is going to increase the cost to the consumer. You move the supply curve without moving the demand curve, and prices increase. That's just how supply and demand and equilibrium works. Just like if you reduce the number of wolves, the number of elk increase, right? And you increase the number of wolves, the number of elk decrease. It's equilibrium. That's how systems work, whether it's a biological system or it's an economic system. That's how closed systems work. You can't get around it. So that's what we have going on as far as the tariffs go. It is, and the gyrations in the market are affecting the sovereign wealth fund that Boskasia has. And we are now in a situation where the equity markets, the stock markets, are declining. Right? They declined on Thursday. They declined on Friday. They declined on Monday before they shot up because people thought that the tariffs were coming off, and then they came back down after the White House said that's fake news, and it came right back down, where they were going down on Tuesday, and then after the announcement that China was going to get hit more for not complying. And let's be clear, I'm going to repeat it. I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. What the United States is looking for here is not to negotiate. It is looking for compliance, because that is what the leadership of the United States looks for. The leadership only believes in negotiating from a position of strength to try and extract everything that they can from those weaker. There is no magnanimity in how the trade partners are treated. It is not a partnership. It is an adversarial relationship. So that is the problem. And that you can bully some people like that. You can bully some nations like that, but you can't. There are some nations that are going to take a stand. And let's face it, if you are not an American, if you are not in the United States, and a nation says we will not comply with what the United States is doing, you're cheering them on, even if it's not your country. Only if you're in the United States do you say that is wrong. Because everybody's for the underdog, except for those who are specifically rooting for the heavy favorite, for the bully. It doesn't matter whether it's sports and you're talking about the New York Yankees, or you're now in football, you're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. In basketball, talking about this year, the Cleveland Cavaliers. But I mean, in general, the last few years has been Golden State or the Lakers, now that LeBron James is on the Lakers. That's just how it works. People gravitate to the underdog, fighting against the odds, not being willing to comply. Rocky Balboa, I mean, it's fictional, but Rocky Balboa, right? Not complying with the plan and fighting the uphill battle. And even when they lose, they are the moral victor. Now, sometimes a moral victory doesn't matter, but that's how people tend to see these things. That's one of the interesting things about human nature, is the gravitation towards the underdog as far as support goes. The United States is not the underdog in this. The United, and quite frankly, it is a interesting way of looking at things to say that a trade deficit means that you are being taken advantage of. That doesn't make sense in any way, shape, or form. That doesn't make sense. The senator from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, Rand Paul, said in an interview this week that he has a trade deficit with the grocery store. He's correct. I have a trade deficit with the grocery store. I have a trade deficit with Home Depot, the Home Depot in Sebring, Florida, that I have to go to get all of my stuff. I have a trade deficit with them. My employer has a trade deficit with me. I have a trade surplus with them as I export my labor out to the financial community. I have a trade surplus with them. And that's okay, because they are getting something in return for it, of value. That piece of value is what's important. And then the other thing that is important about all of this that has to be remembered is none of this is happening under duress. That's the thing that is irritating, for lack of a better term, for me, as the leader of a sovereign nation. Is I am a full-on believer in the free market. Now, free market and capitalism are not the same. We will not get into that today. But I am a full believer in the free market. But you have to have a free market, right? And it's difficult to get a good free market because a free market has requirements. You have to have willing buyers and sellers, okay? You have to be acting without duress, right? You have to, which basically means you can walk away. And it's okay, right? You're not going to suffer harm if you walk away. Theoretically, you benefit if you don't walk away, but you're not going to suffer harm if you walk away, or you will not suffer harm. You will not suffer more harm if you stay in the trade versus walk away, right? So there's no duress there. There has to be enough information so that you can make a good decision, right? There's always going to be imperfect information. You can't get around that, right? I might know more about what's going on in the world that we're making this deal on than you do. But there's no need to try and swindle or pull a fast one or mess with the language of the contract so that it means you don't get, if this one little thing happens, the deal is null and void from your perspective, but I still get everything. That is not the free market. That is I don't even know what the word is. I'm sure there is a word for that type of transaction. I would call it a sham transaction. I would call it a fraudulent transaction, but it is not a free market transaction. And so there's a fourth category, but since I don't have my notes in front of me, I can't recall what that fourth category is. Please email me at almightysigma@boskasia.org if you want to find out what that fourth qualification is of the free market. But those three are good enough to get the point, because what the United States is doing is they are trying to create a situation where their negotiating partner cannot walk away, that they have to take a bad deal in order to do this. And that is not a win-win. It is not a win-win to do that. That's rent seeking, basically. I mean, it's not the technical definition of economic rent seeking, but it's basically rent seeking to throw your weight around, so to speak, in order to get an overly advantageous deal. But that is the negotiating style of the White House, is to always try to take advantage. And then if you look at the past history of those deals, wherever you can, failing to comply and forcing someone to take legal action and hoping that it will be more expensive for them to take the legal action than to actually get paid. And so, it is a terrible, immoral negotiating tactic, but it is the one that the president has used in the past, right? Some people think that that's shrewd. I consider that to be immoral. And yes, there are morals and there are ethics in commerce. I will go to the grave believing that you work with your negotiating partners to come up with a deal that is beneficial to everybody. And if it turns out to not be beneficial for everybody, you work to make it beneficial. So if someone signs a bad deal and you didn't realize it was a bad deal at the time, you go in and you fix it. Right? That is part of integrity. One of the tenets. You have to have integrity in order to do that. There are some cases where, you tell somebody up front. For instance, long time ago, the Chicago Bulls signed Scottie Pippen to what was it? I think it was an 8-year, $24 million contract. So it was $3 million a year. It was a big contract at the time. I don't know whether they said to Pippen, now you're sure about this because you're locked in, right? Don't want you to think that, we're like trying to take advantage of you or anything, but you're locked into this. And he said yes. And then he got mad when, like 4 years in, he couldn't renegotiate. If they told him up front, like, this is what you're getting yourself into, are you sure about that? And he said yes, or his agent said yes, that's a little bit different, right? Circumstances didn't change, right? That's part of the problem with longer term contracts in any instance, right? I mean, I want to say that Coca-Cola signed a deal with the Coca-Cola bottling company to sell sugar at like the 1921 price or something like that. And I think high fructose corn syrup was included in there. But for years, that was able to keep the price of Coca-Cola down because the sugar was locked in at 1921 prices. So they couldn't even raise them for inflation. But Coca-Cola knew what they were getting themselves into. They were doing it in order to try and, get more bottlers to bottle the product throughout the country. They knew what they were getting themselves into. Eventually, they were able to redo it. But, I mean, that's an example. But those are situations where sometimes you want to work to make it work for everyone. But also, you have to do your work up front to make sure that everybody understands what's going on, right? If you see an issue, and this is a personal thing for me, I would be a terrible agent for athletes because I don't know how to not be honest about what I see. Now I can play poker. I can be deceptive when I'm playing poker or something along those lines. But I am a full-on believer in let's make the best deal for everybody and let's make it fair for everybody. And if the team is offering something that's ridiculous, I don't know that I could necessarily represent my athlete appropriately. I just don't know. Because it's like, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you don't want to go? Are you sure you don't want to go longer term and lock my guy in? Right? He's willing to go 6 years, and nowadays 6 years, 120 million. Are you sure you don't want to lock that in? He's 2 years away from probably the prime, according to the statistics. Are you sure you don't want to do that? No, I don't want to do that. We're only going to do a 3-year deal. So 3 years. And then after year 4, he's gone getting 50 million when you could have had him for 20. But that's my problem. That's how I am, is I try to make sure that it is a win for everybody that is involved. That to me is negotiating. That to me is the free market. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. Sometimes you can't see what they want. And you just have to go ahead and say, okay. But for the most part, like in international trade, everybody knows what they want. They want to be able to sell their goods for as little as they can, as far as added tariffs and added delivery fees. So why wouldn't you negotiate for that? But the United States putting on tariffs like just across the board. I mean, Australia has the United States has a trade surplus with Australia, and they have a 10% tariff on Australian goods. And they justify it as saying, well, that's the minimum. What were they going to do? They weren't going to do a reverse tariff or anything like that. So it's nonsensical. It really is nonsensical to me to deal in that way. And that's also one of the reasons why I get a little bit concerned about like bizarre barter, right? Because oftentimes when and I say bizarre because I love that word, but we're talking about like farmers markets and things like that, because I don't know what the duress level is of the other person. And so I mean, because a lot of times I could go ahead and say, all right, $6 for this thing that you're offering for 10. And they say, no, I can walk away, but I don't know if how bad that person needs that money or not. And that matters to me. It matters to me because that's how I believe in doing business. Does that make me a bad businessman? Maybe it does. But that's not a free market to me, and I believe in the free market. So that's 20 minutes of rambling on the tariffs and the free market and negotiating and how I see things. Other things going on. The annexation should occur by April 30th. The Ministry of the Interior has informed me of that. The Ministry of Culture has let me know that they would like to add to the formal plan an additional building. The current buildings that are planned are the government estate, the guest house, the Museum of Boskasia, and now this fourth building. Well, there's the other building, which is the headquarters, the central headquarters for commerce and electricity, the energy, which will manage the solar array. But now, so I guess it would be a fifth building. The fifth building is potentially going to be a movie theater that we're looking at possibly adding on. That would be a later addition to Boskasia. Whether it would be open to the public or just the citizens of Boskasia and visa holders is not yet determined. That's kicking it way down the road, but that is something that we are now beginning to consider. And then the other thing, the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Culture are working together to determine whether or not we want to allocate some of the land in Boskasia as looking for designation as a dark sky park, where we would allow people from the United States and from Boskasia to take advantage of that area in the evenings to view the dark sky that is available to us in Boskasia. So those are the big things that we've been looking at there. We are looking at, like I said, we've pegged the Bosker back to the dollar. Luckily, we were able to do that pretty easily. And the other thing the Ministry of Finance is looking at potentially doing is recalling the Boskers that have been out at the 314.159 exchange rate, and creating a fund to back the issuance of the Bosker. So we would do something along those lines, and in essence, it would work out very similarly to an investment club, in that the Bosker would be backed by an investment portfolio, and so it would start out as 314 Boskers to the dollar that is invested, and then that is what would be issued out there. And then as the wealth fund, because it's backed similarly to how gold would be backed, or something like gold would back a currency back in the day. So it's not fiat currency. It is backed by financial assets, and the Bosker would be worth that particular proportion of however many Boskers have been issued. It would be worth that much of the sovereign wealth fund, of the investment club, so to speak. So looking at possibly doing that. The other thing we're looking at is beginning to do 90-day issuances in either USD or Bosker of debt. They would be a zero coupon debt. So you would potentially buy it for $95, and you would get or it's probably more like, if it's 90 days, it'd be more like $98, and then you would get $100 back in 90 days. That's how that would work. Those are called zero coupon bonds. And we're looking at potentially doing an issuance of those, probably doing that issuance in probably in the middle of May. We'll put out the offering on that, and it would go up by auction as well. So, and like the issuance of the 10-year notes, that will be capped at the rate, at the bond equivalent yield of 200 basis points over treasuries. So keep that in mind. That is something that is coming. If you're interested in doing that, again, please email Almighty Sigma, ALMIGHTY SIGMA @boskasia.org. That would be something, if you're interested in investing in, or if you're interested in being in the first issuance of the Bosker currency, let me know, and I will be glad to keep you up to date on that information. If you ever have any questions about anything that gets discussed in one of these addresses, please email me, ALMIGHTY SIGMA @boskasia.org, or you can go to the website, boskasia.org, where there are several boxes that you can use to send your email. And I will be glad to answer them either personally or through one of these addresses. So thank you very much for listening this week. I appreciate it. And for all of the Boskasian diaspora out there, keep up the faith. Have a great rest of your week.